I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.
Hey, Lee. Happy 50th podcast anniversary.
Holy mother flippin' bull snap.
I really appreciate that effort to censor yourself. That was amazing.
Holy moly. How do we do this?
Yeah. I think the one you had in the first place was a good way to start. Lee's creating his own language. A little like Tolkien, only without elves and things. No, this is
more rednecky.
More redneck Tolkien. I think that should be your tag from now on. I totally will call you that. Have you met my friend Lee, the redneck Tolkien? Oh, no. But this is our 50th podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the big 50. We've recorded a lot that we haven't yet put on.
We're sort of like the Springsteen of podcasts, where we record way more material than we actually post.
People do occasionally refer to me as the boss.
Not me, but other people, perhaps. So we decided, as a way of kind of celebrating this, that we would give a ring. A ring.
He's giving me a ring, an anniversary ring.
I'm not giving you a ring,
that's
even
true.
if I could afford it, which I can't.
And I don't actually. I find rings disgusting.
And that's right. I forgot that. You really do. Like, you can't handle them.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
That's
a conversation for a different time, a different podcast. But
Lee's weirdness.
We could do hours about that.
A series.
We decided that to celebrate this, we would give each of us our list of the 5 works of Chinese literature that we plan to still be reading in 50 years. So for us, this is the best of the best. So
this is it.
We've gotten emails from people saying, "Hey, if I want to read something from this time period, what should I read?" Well, dear listener, this is if you're only going to read 10 things in your whole life in Chinese literature, this is what we suggest.
Yeah. Okay.
So should we have? We're going to go 5, and then down the list. So why don't you go first? What's your number 5? Drum roll.
Like a Casey doing this.
I know. We don't have Casey.
Now we're in the top 5.
Now we're in the top 5. No, that's not going to happen.
So my number 5 is Sima Qian's
All of the
Shiji. Yes.
Wow. That's long.
Yeah, I picked a lot of long works.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Sima Qian is just so amazing, and we have this question of whether or not he's literature. I mean, he calls himself he talks about his work as shi, which is history, but there are these questions, Chinese, they didn't really have quote-unquote history before
Not the way we
Sima
think
Qian.
of it, yeah.
And the Greeks for the West invented history.
Yeah.
They invented that as a thing. Before that, there were kind of stories, but Sima Qian plays that kind of Thucydides role in China. And not only that, he's also a great writer. I would say I like him a lot more than Thucydides.
Oh, yeah, me
Thucydides is kind of boring, gun to my head.
Yeah.
Sima Qian's amazing.
And just has this crazy blend of stuff where, like, that definitely happened. With other things where you're like, that definitely did not happen.
With Thucydides, you're kind of struggling. It's like, okay, I've gotten this. It's the whatever war that was. But Sima Qian, he's like covering. He's claiming to cover all of history.
Yeah.
Up to his time.
Everything.
Now that's an interesting claim, but still, I think Sima Qian, if you're looking for something, it's hard to go wrong. You can find whatever you want in Sima Qian.
I would have to agree. I cannot fault that pick at all. Clarify real quick for those who are not already sure, because we use the term Shiji. The English translation of that is the Records of the Grand Historian.
Thank you.
There may be a really great translation in English, but this is one of these that's very hard to translate. Anyway, still check
Records of the Grand Historian. Sima Qian is his name. Sima being his last name, Qian being his first name.
Yep.
He was China's first historian, and actually the story about him is super interesting. I don't think we have time to get into it, but yeah, like that's a thing.
Okay, my number 5 is War Cry Nahan by Lu Xun. It's one of these works that's usually cited as like a turning point in modern Chinese literature.
It's cited oftentimes as the beginning of modern Chinese literature,
which Lee and I have sort of
debunked.
Yeah, basically.
We I guess double-handedly debunked.
No one can say it anymore because we debunked it. It's variety. There's every kind of thing under the sun in there. There's some poetry. There's just some standard essays and memoirs. There's some what amounts to very realistic sounding short stories, and there's a couple that deal in the supernatural. So he's bringing in lots of different threads of Chinese literature and doing it. His style at its best is just very terse and very there's no fat on any of his stories. The bad ones, there's a lot of fat, of course, but in this collection there's no fat. It's all very interesting, a lot of variety, and It's just about a perfect introduction to where China was then, and yet written in such a way that even if you don't really understand anything about that era, you can totally appreciate where the stories are coming from.
And if I could, that leads right into my fourth recommendation.
Let's hear it.
Lu Xun's Pang Huang.
You put Lu Xun on your list.
I know.
I'm
surprised. On the podcast, I play a guy who hates Lu Xun.
He is a character.
In fact, I don't. The Lee Moore, the person outside the podcast, not the character, but the real guy, is not a hater of Lu Xun.
No.
I think that Lu Xun, I hate the interpretation of Lu Xun that's oftentimes imposed on him and everything that represents. But I actually think he's an amazing writer sometimes. Yeah. And Pang Huang.
What's the English translation for that?
Hesitation? Something like that? You mentioned Nahan, the outcry or war cry or something like that. That's his first work, and that's where his most famous works are. I don't actually think it's his best. I think he comes to his best in his second collection of short stories, which is
Hesitation. Haven't even read his best, my friend. We're going to get to that.
Anyways, I think he comes out in these stories like A New Year's Sacrifice, which is so amazing for its kind of like feminist critique of China and all of these things going on. It's like Zhou Lo Shang in a
booze house. Zhou Lo Shang is hard to translate.
Yeah,
inn or something. I don't know.
But those stories are just. I think that's where he's at his best in terms of writing. He's not dealing with the kind of heavily politicized topics that he's dealing with in Warcry. One of the things that I have a problem with in Lu Xun is, like I said, the politicization. And so in Pang Huang, Hesitations, I think he gets away from that and just goes more into just pure literature, if there is such a thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't fault that. It's like we say, Lu Xun at his best deserves not the reputation of like he created modern Chinese literature, which of course he did not, but as one of the great Chinese language writers of the 20th century, absolutely. My number 4 is a collection of poetry by Du Fu.
Ooh.
Like Lee and I were talking about this beforehand. You can't say on a list like this, the poetry of Du Fu, because that's 5,000 pages or something. But the text I'm thinking of, and I don't even know if I would read the English, but Du Fu's translations by David Hawkes in a text just called A Little Primer of Du Fu. Is if I was going to pick a single work of translated Chinese literature, this would probably be the one I pick because it's beautifully translated. I think he picks a perfect selection of poems by Du Fu, both for their variety and content, and he gives it a nice historical background as well. But mostly I'd pick it for the selection of the poems. You have the pining for home Du Fu, you have the wasting away for his country Du Fu, the Du Fu who's just kind of hanging out with his friends. Everything you need to know about Du Fu is in that text.
Which Du Fu do you want?
I know, that's right. Just pick your Du Fu. That sounds really bad.
It sounds great.
It does sound great. But anyway, that will be my pick for number 4 is the poetry of Du Fu, and David Hawkes is a little primer of Du Fu.
And now for my number 3, we're going to get about as far away from Du Fu as we can.
Hear it.
I'm going to go with Jinping Mei.
Yep.
The Plum in the Golden Vase, the pornographic novel, Ming novel.
He's a dirty old man.
Written probably in the 1490s, maybe in the 1510s. It's not really clear. We don't know the name of the author still because it's such a controversial work. It's this long pornographic text. And when I say pornography, the way it got its name, Plum in the Golden Vase, is not only because it's this beautiful metaphorical image, but there's in chapter 27, the two main characters, the couple, a man named Xi Menqing and his 6th wife, Pan Jinlian. So Xi Menqing is actually throwing plums into
her golden vase.
Thank you. It's an amazing story. We say it's a pornographic novel, and it is pornographic, but it's also a great novel. It's one of China's first novels. It's fascinating that it comes out, that novels come out of this kind of move towards pornography that is happening in the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, and it gives rise to the greatest of Chinese novels, oftentimes considered the greatest of Chinese novels. I'm not as huge of a fan of it. That is Hong Lo Meng, or The Dream of the Red Chamber, sometimes called The Story of the Stone. So that, I think, makes Jinping Mei my 3rd of the 5 that I will be reading in 50 years. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is a short collection of poetry by Mang Ke, the 1980s poet of the Misty School, Menglong Shi Ren. There's a lot of people you could pick in there. Bei Dao is also fantastic, but there's something about Mang Ke. He gets the moniker Mang Ke, which of course is a pen name, from Bei Dao. They were friends. And it's supposed to sound like an English the transliteration for the English word monkey, because he had that sort of prankster, puckish sort of personality. And that comes out in his poetry. It can be very, very dark, but there's also these really playful turns of phrase where you're reading and you're like, huh, that's really almost kind of fun in the middle of this bleak poem about how things are in post-Maoist China.
And we actually had an interview with one of the experts on Mang Ke. That's Lucas Klein.
Yeah, and it is partly due to having written a review of Lucas's translation, like the translation project that he was working on at the time, that really clued me into what Mang Ke was doing. And it's the kind of poetry that bears up under, well, frankly, lots of writing about it. There's a ton you can say about it in just a short span. He does a lot of stuff with that. That's my number 3. All right, we're down to the final 2. Let's see what you come up with.
For my number 2, Ban Cheng Yuan by Zhang Ailing. That is Romance of a Half-Life. I just have to put Zhang Ailing on this list. You knew that was coming.
I knew something about her was coming, for sure.
I think that novel is great. There's a new English translation out a couple of years ago. I think it's actually called Romance of a Half-Life, something like that. Zhang Ailing, or Aileen Chang, she's the best writer of the 20th century in Chinese literature, I would argue. My humble opinion. A lot of people say that's Lu Xun. I disagree. I think she's the best. The story, it's somewhat autobiographical. There are long periods where she's locked up by her father in her room and just brutally beaten. But Zhang Ailing writes so fantastically. I just love reading her. And I think she's very interesting as a writer. Her reception on the mainland, she's loved by most people but hated by the party. And that's an interesting.
Do you think that continues? Do they? Is that still?
Really?
It
definitely. So every writer in China has a museum. Like Lu Xun has like 5.
Right. If not hundreds.
Yeah. But word on the street is that from up above, they are not allowed to build a Zhang Ailing museum.
Interesting.
And there is a cafe in which Zhang Ailing is featured, and that's kind of a semi-museum to Zhang Ailing. But it was told it had to tamp down on its Zhang Ailing love. So she is still a highly politicized author.
Well, this in some ways is your perfect introduction, if you haven't already read Zhang Ailing, of the kind of writer she was, in the sense that if she had been told years ago, listen, the party and the government are not going to give you a museum, but everybody in China is going to read you way more than Lu Xun or the others, I think she'd be stoked.
Yeah.
She doesn't care about that kind of stuff. And I know, we, in your full disclosure about really liking Lu Xun, we sort of butt heads about this issue, but I think Zhang Ailing is fantastic as well. I think if you were to begin reading Chinese fiction, you had no idea where to start, Zhang Ailing would be a great place to start.
That's because she's so relatable across cultures.
She is, and we've compared her this way as sort of the Chinese version of Jane Austen.
Yeah.
And it really is that way. You can simply read her stories, enjoy them, and move on, or
you can read.
You can really dig.
Yeah.
You can read and reread and reread and get a lot more out of them each time.
Yeah.
And that's frankly the mark of a fantastic writer. So,
what's your number 2?
My number 2, I'm going to be disappointed if this isn't on your list. The Zhuangzi.
Oh, it's not on my list.
Oh, you are such a terrible person. I can't even
wasn't
believe
thinking.
it.
I knew you were going to say that. That's actually one of my top 10 favorite works in all of Chinese, in all of literature.
Yeah,
I'll just say all of literature.
It's stupendous. It is. There really is nothing like it in any other culture in the world. It's a combination of, frankly, just snarky comments and profound thinking,
heady
and
philosophical
jokes
treatise,
and slapstick and mythology. It's all just thrown in there.
If I write philosophy, it will be because of Zhuangzi.
Yeah, Zhuangzi changes the way you read Chinese classics when you first encounter it.
Changes the way you read anything.
Yeah,
he changed my life.
It really is like. In fact, it's interesting too because he's one of the writers that you will read if you study classical Chinese. Is like if you take a classical Chinese class, you will get to him like by class 2 of 3. In addition to being so fascinating and so broad and so interesting, it's very, I mean, it's very terse. It's not, frankly, that hard to read. Like, I can read it in the classical. I mean, I'm not going to make a translation of it. I'm not that good. But I can read it well enough in the classical to appreciate it completely. Whereas something like Sima Qian, I'm not still getting there, you know.
Yeah.
But Zhuangzi is stupendous. He's not only informative, but also extremely entertaining.
It's often unclear of what he's saying, but it's not
which is
because
part of the fun.
it's not because of the language. It's because of he's just really
him. I mean,
crazy.
It's like he's literally trying to mess with people and saying, yeah, I'm not going to tell you where I'm landing on this one.
If you read it before you're 18, it will change the way you think.
You'll think about becoming a Taoist or something.
It's an amazing work. I think that would have been my top one, but...
Okay. You know what we should do? Let's see if I can guess your top. Let's see. What would your top choice be? I'm going to guess a collection of poetry by Li Bai. No? How about...
I was disappointed I didn't put any poetry on this list.
I know, it's because you have no taste whatsoever.
It was because I wanted volume over quality.
If we're stuck on a desert island, you want to have plenty for toilet paper as well in case things get desperate. I don't know. Aside from Li Bai, I have a hard time picking out... okay, give me a hint. Is it classical or more modern?
Classical.
It's classical.
But not that classical.
Not that classical. Vernacular fiction of some kind? No. Wow. Okay.
It's in classical.
Okay, let's hear it. What do you got?
Pu Song Ling's Liao Zhai Zhi Yi.
Yeah, I should have guessed that. I don't know why I didn't guess that.
And I think it could be Zhuangzi or this, but Pu Song Ling is really the 2 millennia later heir to Zhuangzi, in that what Zhuangzi, the kind of crazy philosophical, interesting work that Zhuangzi does, Pu Song Ling actuates in these series of ghost stories. He's actually like taking the sense of change that Zhuangzi latches onto, and he's making it into these awesome ghost stories.
Yeah, they are awesome. It is an awesome collection. That's not one of those if someone's like, where should I start with Chinese literature? Zhang Ailing's probably a good bet. If you're looking for something older, this would be a good place to go to, because it's just the only reason, I thought very seriously about putting that on my list, and the only reason I didn't is because I was trying to think of things that I would want to reread and reread. And for as much as I like Pu Song Ling, I can't see myself like reading that over and over and over again for like decades and decades. The first time through, it's a roller coaster ride. It's fantastic, but I haven't found any of the stories yet where I've been like, man, I'm going to go back and read that one again.
I disagree.
You're free to. I can't fault the choice. That's a who has a problem putting that on a list of all-time great Chinese works?
So Rob, what's your number one?
See if you already see my list.
I did. I was looking, but I was
okay. It's your turn. See if you can guess. I'll give you 2 guesses. You can even ask for clues.
Can I have a clue?
Well, yeah, it's modern, as in 20th century.
Oh wow, I didn't expect that. Oh, is it Haizi?
It's not Haizi. I almost thought about putting that on there, but frankly, this particular work is more interesting.
Can I have another clue?
Early 20th century. Well, first half of the 20th century.
Is it Shizhi Cun?
No. Although I thought that would have been an interesting pick too. No, I didn't put that on there.
What is it?
It is Wild Grass by Lu Xun. Yeah, it's all.
Yeah, okay.
I have come back to this work again and again, and every single time I come back to it, I am amazed at what I'm reading.
Yeah.
This is one of when I was living in China and just discovering Chinese literature for the first time, this is the one I used to pass around to people who were like, I don't know, I don't really think there's been much in the 20th century in China that's any good. I was like, read this. And then afterwards, they were almost all like, wow, that was amazing. It's a collection of prose poems and regular poems.
They're just kind of, I mean, they're weird like Zhuangzi, and there's these
all
constant
over.
transformations.
You're never allowed to settle anywhere. Lu Xun wrote it in a period in his life when he had just before he had sort of decided literature was defunct and had no purpose. So there's a lot of that running through there, but it's weird. There's these peculiar little ghost stories that'll go for 2 paragraphs, or you'll be reading a standard description of a tree and all of a sudden it goes south and becomes something different. And when you read anything else by Lu Xun, this is a total anomaly. It's very hard to know what to do with if you're used to a certain kind of writing from Lu Xun. And it's very short. You can read the entire collection in a couple of hours. It's not very long. But the amount of imagination and just stylistic experimentation that's in that short collection is why it's number one on my list. Like, yeah, absolutely read this again and again.
I guess the thing that strikes me about these lists is that we're both dealing with the Zhuangzi. Whether or not Zhuangzi is on our list, he's hovering over everything you and I are doing for a lot of these. Pu Songling and Lu Xun, I think, are both indebted to Zhuangzi.
Yeah, you know what? When I look at the list, I think you're right. A lot of the works that we've chosen are works that are very, very hard to peg. Yeah, you know, even something like the Shiji, is it history? Kind of. Is it fiction? Kind of. Like, no matter where you settle, it's
those
like the genre
categories
category.
don't really apply in terms of like native Chinese historical thinking.
Even like on my list, the poetry of Mang Ke, which it's obviously poetry. Still, like, there's things are happening in there that you can't. You start reading one kind of poem, and then 2 lines later, you're reading a different kind of poem. And I think you're right. I think that's true for all of them.
We have a request for the listener. And that's for our 50th anniversary, or our 50th episode anniversary. Would you mind, listener, sending in information about yourself, if you're willing? Just like tell us who you are and what you like about our podcast, what you think we could improve on, what you want us to read. I mean, we've
gotten a couple of emails about that, and they've been very, very helpful. And when Lee says send in information about yourself, what we of course mean is email the website that we have, or not the website, but our Gmail account. Not like send us letters in the mail, which would be creepy.
And that Gmail account is just ChineseLiteraturePodcast@gmail.com.
That's it.
So send us something. Also, if you wouldn't mind leaving us ratings on iTunes and other podcast sites that you use, that helps us get out there and get the word out about this podcast.
Those kinds of things do tend to boost, the number, the availability of the podcast to people. They hear about it more easily. So
yeah, I think that's a great place to end.
I think so.
All right, I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore,
and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.